الحمد لله رب العالمين نحمده سبحانه وتعالى على أنعمه العظيمة وآلائه الجسيمة. اللهم لك الحمد يا ربنا، أنت أحق أن تحمد، ولك الشكر، أنت أحق أن تشكر، وأنت على كل شيء قدير. لك العتبى حتى ترضى، ولا حول ولا قوة لنا إلا بك. اللهم لك الحمد يا ربنا بعدد قطر الأمطار، ولك الحمد يا ربنا ما تعاقب الليل والنهار. لك الحمد كله ولك الشكر كله، وإليك يرجع الأمر كله وعلانيته وسره، إنك على كل شيء قدير. وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبد الله ورسوله وصفيه من خلقه وحبيبه، بلغ الرسالة وأدى الأمانة ونصح الأمة وكشف الغمة، وجاهد في الله حق الجهاد حتى أتاه اليقين. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على الحبيب المصطفى محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه وأتباعه ومن اهتدى بهديه وعمل بسنته إلى يوم الدين، وارض عنا معهم بفضلك وكرمك يا أرحم الراحمين، اللهم آمين. I praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I offer Him my most sincere gratitude for all the blessings that He has bestowed upon me and my family and loved ones. I thank Allah in words and action. I say Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillah for the blessings that I know and the blessings that I know not. I bear witness that there is no deity worthy of worship save Allah. And I bear witness that Muhammad is Allah's final prophet and messenger, the bearer of glad tidings, the role model to be followed, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. May the peace and the blessings of Allah be upon him, his family and followers and companions, and all men and women that walk steadily in their footsteps until the day of judgment. And I ask Allah to make each and every one of us among them. Allahumma ameen. My dear brothers and sisters, I greet you with the greeting of Islam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I was reading from the Quran the other day. I came across this beautiful ayah from Surah Al-A'raf, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enumerates some of the simple blessings that He has granted us, one that we don't often thank Him enough for. And in that ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يا بني آدم قد أنزلنا عليكم لباسا يواري سوآتكم وريشا ولباس التقوى ذلك خير. In the translation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in this ayah in Surah Al-A'raf, O sons and daughters of Adam, we have bestowed upon you from on high garments to cover your nakedness, to cover your awrah, and as a thing of beauty. So He says that there are two purposes for the concept of us wearing clothes. There are two purposes. One is that it covers our nakedness, that human being by nature wants to cover. In every culture, in every religion, in every faith or tradition, people naturally prefer to cover at least parts of their body. So Allah says that He sent those garments upon us for those two purposes. One is to cover our nakedness, and the other one, as the Quran says, urisha. It's like, putting feathers. Native Americans, they used to put feathers on their heads by way of ornamenting themselves, by way of embellishing, making themselves look nicer and more beautiful. So the purpose is for it to cover our awrah, and in addition to that, to be a thing of beauty for us. We wear nice, beautiful clothes, colorful, fashionable. We make a statement about our identities, about our cultural backgrounds, about what we stand for. People who wear t-shirts, and those t-shirts have statements on them. We automatically assume that that is a statement, about the person, and not just a t-shirt, because that is the slogan that you're walking around with. But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala adds a very important statement to this, and He says, وَلِبَاسُ التَّقْوَى ذَلِكَ خَيْرٌ. The garments of God consciousness are much better and much more important. The garments of God consciousness, taqwa, are much more important than the garments that we wear that cover our nakedness and our awrah. And I reflected a lot upon this ayah, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about clothes garments, and he talks about God consciousness or taqwa in the same ayah, almost saying that these two things are related somehow to each other. I talked about this before, and I said that it is one thing to dress nicely and to show people that you're capable of selecting the best suits or the best dresses from your wardrobe every morning. It is actually sunnah, by the way, to dress nicely. The Prophet ﷺ used to wear beautiful clothes. He used to wear perfume all the time, and nice, beautiful turbans, a reflection of the fashion of his time. ﷺ. He was offered clothes as gifts from Yemen, from Egypt, from the Persian Empire, from the Roman Empire, and he wore all of them. He didn't say, I only wear what the Arabs wear. He, ﷺ, had a very diverse closet, a very diverse wardrobe, ﷺ. There's nothing wrong with wearing nice clothes, fashionable clothes, expensive clothes if you can afford it. There's nothing wrong with that. But what is absolutely wrong, brothers and sisters, is for the outside to be clean and beautiful, and for the inside to be destroyed. What Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants you to do is to wear nicely on the outside and the inside. Your skin is clothed by these beautiful garments, and your heart is clothed with taqwa, with God consciousness. Do both. Don't practice what some of the Sufis used to practice, throughout history, where wearing torn, messed up clothes was somehow a sign of religiosity, right? It's not true. That is not true. It is a false statement. The great scholars and the great Sahaba and Ahlul Bayt and the Khulafa, they always wore beautiful clothes. That's fine. Wear nice clothes, designer clothes if you can afford it. Get the $500 shirts if you can afford that. But you have to give the right of the wealth that you have. You have to give your sadaqah and your charity, and you have to support your community. But if you have plenty of wealth left, hey, buy your expensive $2,000 suits if you want. However, at the end of the day, you always want to make sure that the heart is also surrounded by the beautiful garments of taqwa. And I thought about that a lot. Clothes and taqwa. And I was preparing a talk for the UC Davis MSA last week. And I came across some connections in Shirt of Yusuf that I never really thought of before, and I wanted to share with you today. So the idea of garments and taqwa, God consciousness, I want you to keep that in your mind, inshallah, when you're listening to my words today. You open up Surah Yusuf, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the very beginning of the surah, He says what to you? نَحْنُ نَقُصُّ عَلَيْكَ أَحْسَنَ الْقَصَصِ. He says about Surah Yusuf, I will tell you, or I will narrate to you the best story that was ever told. And if you think about it, Surah Yusuf is one of the most powerful stories in human history. An entire surah in the Quran is dedicated to that one story. It's the only story that took a surah to tell. Musa alayhi salam was mentioned in the Quran over 30 times, but it was never in one exclusive surah. Surah Yusuf, from the beginning to the end, it only talks about Yusuf alayhi salam. Right? And as any successful story, including the story that you tell your children when you're putting them to bed and you're tucking them in, right? Every powerful story needs to have 5 or 6 elements. They talk about characters. It has to have characters. Imagine telling a story without characters whatsoever. You have to have people who are doing things and saying stuff in the story. Otherwise, there's no story. Number 2, you have to have a plot. They went to this place and they did those things and this and that happened, right? There has to be some kind of a twist in the story, right? There's an angle, there's a perspective, followed by a reaction that happened, and then there is a conclusion to the story, right? Every story in the world, every successful story in the world has to have elements. So when you're telling your children, stories at home, you need to follow some of those basic elements of a story. Otherwise, your stories will be very, very boring to the kids. Okay? And usually the story has a beautiful climax in the end. So when I was talking to the students about, Surah Yusuf, and I was preparing the surah, And I realized that there is an element of every powerful story that we don't talk about that much. And it's called a motif. The motif is a symbol, is an object that has a symbol in the story. And the storyteller keeps going back to that same object, to that same symbol, and making references back to it. Okay? Stand-up comedians do that all the time. They would tell a story about their moms or their friend or whatever, and they keep going back to that same story in a funny way, making connections. And when you use a motif in your story, the audience is captivated because they always remember, oh, that story was about this thing. And then I realized something really amazing about the story of Yusuf alayhi salam, that it had a motif in it. And the motif is an object that was mentioned in the story 3 times. You know what it is? It's the shirt of Yusuf alayhi salam. The shirt of Yusuf alayhi salam is the motif. The Quran calls it qamis. Right? It was mentioned 3 times in this story, if you guys remember. The very beginning of the story, when the sons of Yaqub alayhi salam got so jealous of their little brother and they decided to fake, this whole thing that he was eaten by wolves. So they threw him in the pig hole and they took his shirt, and what did they do with the shirt? They slaughtered a lamb, they took the blood of the lamb and they bloodied the shirt with it. And they brought back the bloodied shirt to the father. Father, we're so sorry. I know we're supposed to take care of our little brother, but we couldn't, and he was eaten by wolves. The second time this qamis, this shirt was mentioned in the story, was mentioned when? You remember? When he was running away from the seduction of the magistrate's wife in Egypt. But she desired him, and she was, I don't know if it was a combination of desire or ego. How could you, turn me off? How could you turn me away? And I'm a powerful woman, and I'm inviting you to do something like this with me, and you say, who do you think you are? So she goes after him, and she runs after him, and she grabs him from his shirt from the back, and that shirt was torn. Right? And what was the third time the qamis was mentioned in the story of Yusuf alayhi salam? It was mentioned in the very end. When Yaqub alayhi salam lost his other young son, Benjamin, or he thought he lost him, he cried so hard and he wept so badly until he lost his eyesight. And then his sons came back from Egypt, and with them, the news that Yusuf alayhi salam has become this amazing leader of Egypt. And he says, I swear I can smell Yusuf. And then he said, Dad, you're still doing your same old thing. Stop. You hurt yourself. And the messenger came from Egypt with what in his hands? With the shirt of Yusuf alayhi salam. And he put the shirt on the face of Yaqub, and that's when Yaqub restored his eyesight. Right? 3 times and the story keeps going back to the same thing. Let me tell you something about the qamis, this shirt that we're talking about here. In one of the narrations, brothers and sisters, and this is extremely amazing, and I guarantee that most of you never heard it before. In one of the narrations that are attributed to Abdullah ibn Abbas, he says that when Ibrahim alayhi salam was thrown in the fire, remember, in Iraq, when the king decided to punish Ibrahim, what did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say to the fire? قُلْنَا يَا نَارُ كُونِي بَرْدًا وَسَلَامًا عَلَى إِبْرَاهِيمَ. Allah commanded the fire to be cool and safe at the same time. See, if Allah says to the fire, be cool, the fire will follow the order of the Lord to the letter, and then it might become so cold. SubhanAllah, it'll completely lose its function, and that is to burn things. But Allah said, be cool and safe for Ibrahim. So according to Abdullah ibn Abbas, he says that while that command applied to Ibrahim alayhi salam, it did not necessarily apply to his clothes. So his clothes burned, but he did not burn. So he's sitting there naked, right, in the midst of the fire, and Jibreel alayhi salam comes to him and he says, Ya Ibrahim, alaka haja? Is there anything that you need, anything that you desire? So Ibrahim alayhi salam responds to Jibreel and he says, Amma minka fala. From you I have no desire, I have no need. وأما من الله عز وجل فعلمه بحالي يغنيه عن سؤالي. As for the Lord, His knowledge of my state is more than enough. I don't need to say anything. I don't need to request anything because the Lord knows what I'm going through. So I'm not going to say anything. So Jibreel alayhi salam, that's the part of the story that many people don't know. Jibreel alayhi salam said, well, the Lord sent this gift to you. He says that you don't have clothes, so He wanted you to use this qamis to cover your awrah. This shirt to cover your awrah. Now it's funny because if you ask the Arabs of today the meaning of qamis, they'll think like it's this shirt, like this one, which is, it only covers your upper torso. But the word qamis, like South Asians, for example, they have the word shawar qamis, right? And shawar qamis covers all the way below your knees. Sometimes up, above your knees or below your knees. It's a much longer piece of garment than the qamis for the Arabs, right? And that is the piece of garment that, according to this particular narration, that Jibreel alayhi salam gave to Ibrahim in order for him to cover himself until he gets out of the fire. But that divine gift that came from Jannah stayed with Ibrahim until he got very, very old, and he gave it as a gift to his son Ishaq. And it stayed with Ishaq until he got old, and he in return gave it as a gift to his son Yaqub, and Yaqub alayhi salam gave it to Yusuf when he was a little kid. According to Abdullah ibn Abbas. There is a power, a divine connection to the qamis that Yusuf alayhi salam had. It was not just some thing, right? It's not just some shirt. But then the interesting thing is that Tahir ibn Ashur, the great scholar of Tunis, one of the greatest fuqaha, by the way, of our history, from Tunisia, Muhammad al-Tahir ibn Ashur, in his tafsir, At-Tahrir wa Tanwir, Liberation and Enlightenment, one of the greatest tafsir, by the way, of all time, one of my favorites. In addition to Sheikh Rashid Rida's Al-Manar, this is a powerful, insightful tafsir that brings science and history and spirituality together in a beautiful way. So, check it out if you have access to those Arabic texts online. Tahir ibn Ashur says that while the story is really, really powerful, I think that it goes a little bit too far. And I know that some scholars say this story is a strong story, but Tahir ibn Ashur questions its authenticity a little bit. And he says, I prefer to believe that qamis, that the shirt, was symbolic to taqwa. It doesn't happen in America any longer. It doesn't happen in the world anymore, unfortunately. But back in the day, parents used to inherit gifts from their parents. Like you would have your grandfather's watch, for example. And it becomes such an important thing for you to give your grandfather's watch to your oldest son. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? Or a mother that has a beautiful necklace from her grandmother. And she keeps the beautiful necklace and she gives her to either her daughter, if she has a daughter, or maybe she gives her to her daughter-in-law when her son gets married. You know this dynamic? This idea of an heirloom gift that stays in the family. Such a beautiful thing. It's about culture, it's about heritage, it's about history and identity. It's a beautiful thing that unfortunately we don't do anymore. What do I need my grandfather's watch for? I'm just going to get that $25 watch from Walmart. People don't think about these sentimental, beautiful things any longer. Okay? But while Ibn Abbas, according to the story, says that the heirloom gift was a shirt, Ibn Ashur says the heirloom gift was taqwa. You can think of it literally, or you can think of it metaphorically. And as a parent, and I know that you would agree with me, you can leave a watch, you can leave a shirt, you can leave a necklace to your children, and they will give it over to their grandchildren or whatever. It stays in the family, that's fine. But I can tell you right now on this pulpit that the greatest gift you can ever give your children, the greatest gift you can ever leave in your family, is the idea of God consciousness. Is the idea that you do the right thing whether your parents are looking over your shoulders or not. You do the right thing whether authority is breathing down your neck or not. You do the right thing whether anyone else is looking or not, because if nobody is looking, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always looking. Isn't that the meaning of taqwa? Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib, radiallahu anhu, he defines taqwa and he says, taqwa hiya al-khawfu min al-jalil. You are in awe of the most sublime, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. At-taqwa hiya al-amalu bit-tanzil. You implement the instructions in the scriptures in your life. At-taqwa hiya al-rida bil-qalil. You are content with whatever little you might have from this dunya. Your heart never agonizes about it. At-taqwa hiya al-isti'dadu li-yawm al-rahil. To be in a state of preparedness for the day of departure when you leave this world. Right? And so while I feel that the story of Abdullah ibn Abbas is really interesting and heartwarming and amusing, but I feel for our purposes, we need to think of this gift, al-qamis, as a symbol for taqwa, as a symbol for God consciousness. And think about that in our daily lives when we teach things to our children, when we communicate with others. Are you God conscious or not? Are you aware that the Creator is always keeping an all-watchful eye on you or not? You don't have to have the authority telling you follow the law, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always watchful. Right? That's such a powerful and liberating thought. To be driven to do the right thing from the heart. Not because you're scared of consequences. Not because you're worried about getting in trouble. You do the right thing because it is the right thing. And that is essentially the meaning of taqwa. And that is reflected in the story. Going back to the motif that I was talking about. In the story of Yusuf alayhi salam. The first shirt, brothers and sisters, the bloodied shirt. You know what the scholars call that shirt? They call it Qamisul Amal. The shirt of hope. The bloodied shirt that brought the bad, the sad, the agonizing news to Yaqub that his son has been lost. The scholars call that the shirt of hope. You know why? Because the first thing Yaqub did is that he examined the shirt. He looked at it. And he realized that it was bloody, but it was not torn. It was not torn. If it is true that wolves ate my son, it would have been both bloodied and torn at the same time. And the shirt is not torn, which means that my son is still alive. Alhamdulillah. It's a shirt of hope for Yaqub alayhi salam. You can only achieve that state of mind if you have consciousness of Allah in your heart. You see why? Qamis al-taqwa. This is the shirt of God consciousness. The symbol in Surah Yusuf that keeps reminding us of this beautiful notion over and over and over again. While you and I might think of a bloodied shirt as a bad omen, as a sign of death and destruction, Yaqub alayhi salam looked at that and said, Alhamdulillah, at least my son is alive. You have plotted something against my son, but he's certainly not dead. He's not dead. And he lived with that hope for the rest of his life. A heart that is full of the consciousness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will never despair and will never lose hope. The second time the shirt was mentioned, when the shirt was torn from the back, when Yusuf was wearing it. See, the funny thing is that the first shirt is bloodied but not torn. The second shirt is torn but not bloodied. Right? You know what the scholars call it? They call it Qamisul Bara'ah. The shirt of innocence. Because it proved to everyone that Yusuf alayhi salam was not involved in seducing that woman. It was the other way around. وَشَهِدَ شَاهِدٌ مِّنْ أَهْلِهَا. A witness from their people is the one that testified to that. If he was torn from the front, then he was the one that came onto her. If he was torn from the back, then she was the one that was making advancements, towards him. Right? And again, it takes so much God consciousness to resist the seduction of a powerful, beautiful woman. And this is a young man who was never been with a woman before, who is a slave. And being with that woman and satisfying her desires would mean a lot more than those desires. It would mean that he would be privileged, he would be treated differently, he would be given less work, he would be pampered in the house, right? But he resists all the temptations. And he says, Ma'adh Allah, I seek refuge in Allah from what you're asking of me. I cannot do that. SubhanAllah, wallahi, brothers and sisters, much more powerful men in perfect circumstances, under perfect circumstances, might fail that test. But Yusuf alayhi salam, in the most difficult of circumstances, he did not fail. And that is a reflection of his God consciousness, right? His taqwa. This shirt was mentioned, the end of the story, when the shirt came to Yaqub alayhi salam, covered his face, and that's how he restored his eyesight. What is that an indication of, by the way? Yaqub alayhi salam, Yusuf alayhi salam, was hurt by his brothers. His brothers that he loved and trusted are the ones that turned on him, threw him in the pit, and sold him as a slave. And after all these years, he separated from his family. He lived in a foreign country, had to learn a different language, had to endure prison for at least 7 years, for a maximum of 7 years. And then he had a chance to exact vengeance on his brothers, right? And he would have probably been justified. But he didn't do that. He eventually forgave them. And he said what to his brothers? لا تثريب عليكم اليوم. You will not be punished today. I forgive you. I forgive you. And it is that forgiveness that was reflected in the shirt when the shirt came back to Yaqub alayhi salam, infused with that beautiful spirit, and that is how his eyesight was restored. And that could have never happened without the taqwa, the God consciousness of Yusuf alayhi salam either. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just to increase the level of God consciousness in our hearts. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on this day to strengthen our hearts and our resolve to make better choices under the most difficult of circumstances. I ask Allah to increase the love that we have for all the prophets and the messengers in the Quran and the role models and their legacies. Brothers and sisters, raise your hands and speak to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the heart. ادعوا الله وأنتم موقنون بالإجابة. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعين به ونستهديه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فهو المهتدي ومن يضلل فلن تجد له وليا مرشدا. وأصلي وأسلم على المبعوث رحمة للعالمين وقائد الغر الميامين محمد الصادق الوعد الأمين. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه وأتباعه ومن اهتدى بهديه وعمل بعمله إلى يوم الدين. وارض عنا معهم بفضلك وكرمك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم آمين. Brothers and sisters, I talked to you today about the notion of God consciousness as inspired by the beautiful story of Yusuf alayhi salam. And I said that every story has elements that make it a powerful and effective and a successful story. They talk about characters or protagonists, they talk about plot, and theme, and structure, twist, climax, conclusion, moral. There's so many of them. But the one that I focused on today is called the motif. And the motif of a story is a symbolic object that the storyteller keeps making references back to, and it signifies the underlying moral of the story or the underlying gist of the story in a beautiful, indirect way that stimulates our imagination. And the motif is important because it is so efficient in retention. It helps people remember the story when they go. So, after today, I'm hoping that everyone will remember the khutbah today because you'll say, the Imam was talking about the shirt of Yusuf, right? And the shirt of Yusuf, I said it was mentioned 3 times. One, the first time when the sons of Yusuf, they pretended that, he was eaten by wolves and they bloodied the shirt with a lamb's blood, and they brought that shirt to their father as evidence. And he realized that the shirt was not torn, so he felt right then and there that his son is actually alive, and that's why the scholars called it the shirt of hope. That the first one. The second one, when he was being seduced by the magistrate's wife in Egypt, and he refused, and he left, and she basically held him from the back. She held his shirt and she tore the shirt, but it was because of that his innocence was established, and it became known as the shirt of innocence. The third one is when Yaqub alayhi salam lost his eyesight. And the shirt of Yusuf came from Egypt, and when he put it on his face, his eyesight was restored. And that one is called Qamis al-Shifa, or the shirt of healing. And I said that the underlying meaning of this shirt, if we assume that the shirt is basically a motif or a symbol in the story, I think that it symbolizes God consciousness. You are aware that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala watches you and He knows what you do, and that Allah Azza wa Jal has prepared a beautiful reward for you if you make better decisions in this world, and that He desires for you to be with him in heaven. And that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants you to be his companion in Jannah. And that he has provided you with every possible utility, with every possible instrument that will make that easier for you. But if you ignore all that, you might earn yourself the wrath of the Lord. And we don't know how that will translate on the Day of Judgment. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for you and I, al-afiyah, as the Prophet says, protection and preservation from the wrath of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But I wanted to conclude the khutbah and the story that I mentioned earlier to you by saying that level of God consciousness remained with Yusuf at every step of his life. It was always with him, his entire life. When he was a kid, he was selected by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be a prophet because of his good heart. When he was in Egypt, he did the bidding of his master and he worked as hard as possible even though he was a slave. He refused to dishonor and betray his master and accept the advances of his wife. When he was in prison, his God consciousness continued to inspire him to make da'wah and to talk to other prisoners and other inmates about God and about monotheism and about right or wrong. When he got out of prison and he became the magistrate himself, he saved the entire country of Egypt from famine. And when his brothers came, his God consciousness enabled him to forgive them instead of exacting revenge upon them. And at the very end, you and I know the story. Yaqub alayhi salam and Yusuf's mother and everyone, they came to Egypt. And he hugged both of his parents. After all these years he had not seen them, he hugged them both. And all of his brothers prostrated. And that is again the power of Surah Yusuf. It has this amazing symbolism. It starts with a dream and it ends with the interpretation of the dream. Right? It's a very powerful story, beautiful story. But then, according to the narrations, Yaqub alayhi salam is ailing, he's elderly, and he's not very strong. And he prefers to live in the desert because it suits his health better. So he says to his son, I cannot come into the city. Can I still be close and we can still see each other on a regular basis? So he says, Father, I will build an encampment for you and the family on the outskirts of the city so that you guys live there in your tents and I can always visit you and you can visit me. So Yaqub alayhi salam lived there for the remaining years of his life. And one day he felt that his time is almost up. He's on his deathbed and he wanted to make sure that his son Yusuf was okay. So he sent a messenger to go and investigate and look at Yusuf and his ahal, his state, how he lives and what he worships and whether his heart was corrupted with wealth and power or not. And the messenger came back to Yaqub and Yaqub asked, كيف تركت يوسف? In what state did you leave my son? And he says, Ya Nabi Allah, messenger of God, I تركته على الملك, I left him with great dominion. He's a very, very powerful man. And Yaqub says, what do I care for dominions? Tell me, what faith does he follow? على أي دين تركته? What faith does he follow? And he says, oh, you don't have to worry about that. تركته على الإسلام. I left him in a state of Islam. And Yaqub says, Alhamdulillah. الآن تمت النعمة. Now the blessings of Allah have been completed upon me. I need nothing of life any longer. And he surrendered himself and passed away. And his son Yusuf was not next to him. And Yusuf later learned that his father passed away, Yaqub alayhi salam. And he was heartbroken by that fact. And he asked him, what did my father say? Before he left the world, he said he asked about you. And he made sure that you're living a life that abides by the teachings of Islam. And Yusuf alayhi salam made it the mission of his existence to live as Muslim and to die as Muslim, driven by the God consciousness that has been imparted on him by his parents and their parents before them. And at the very end of his journey, Yusuf alayhi salam, and subhanAllah, you read this and you feel like, if only I can live that kind of honorable, dignified life, live as Muslim, inshallah, and die as Muslim. And for my children to live as Muslims and to die as Muslims, so that we can always meet each other, inshallah, in Jannah. Yusuf alayhi salam, at the end of his life, he speaks to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. in this beautiful munajah that is mentioned in Surah Yusuf. See, the difference between dua and munajah is that munajah is when you speak to the Lord as a loving friend. Dua is when you make a request. So most of it is a munajah, and at the very end he makes two requests, and I'll tell you what he said. He speaks to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and he enumerates the ni'mah, all the blessings that the Lord has bestowed upon him, has granted him. Rabbi, قد آتيتني من العلم وعلمتني من تأويل الأحاديث. Lord, you have blessed me with an abundance of knowledge, and you have taught me how to interpret the dreams. فاطر السماوات والأرض. O Creator of heavens and earth, أنت وليي في الدنيا والآخرة. You are my supporter, you are my helper, you are my partner in this life and the next. Again, you speak to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and you list the bounties and the blessings, right? And at the very end, what does he say? Two things. توفني مسلما وألحقني بالصالحين. Cause me to die in a state of Islam and make me follow the righteous. Lord, if you don't think I am righteous, if you don't think I'm good enough for your Jannah, if I have made terrible mistakes and I have done terrible things and I ask you to forgive me for everything I've done, but if you think I am not good enough and I'm not righteous enough, would you at least admit me with the righteous? Can I follow them? He doesn't even say, make me among the righteous. He says, will you just allow me to follow in the footsteps of the righteous? If you make no dua whatsoever in your life except those two, it'll be good enough, I swear to God. To ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you live and die in a state of Islam and that you follow in the footsteps of the righteous. There's nothing more important than that. And if Allah grants you that, if Allah gives you taqwa in the life of this world, there's nothing else to ask for, because that will be your compass. That will be your guide. That will determine your actions. If you are able to teach your children God consciousness, I swear, you don't need to teach them anything else, because that will drive the entire process on its own. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on this day to make us among the people of taqwa, people of God consciousness, those who, while they might make mistakes, they always return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in repentance. I ask Allah to forgive us for the mistakes that we've committed, for our shortcomings. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us among those who forgive people for their trespasses and those who will be forgiven for theirs. I ask Allah on this day to make us among those who are inspired by the beautiful stories of the Quran, those who are touched by the stories of the Quran, those who find a way to implement those stories in their lives. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on this day to make us deserving of the greatest ni'mah He had ever granted us, and that is being Muslims. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us deserving of being Muslims. And I ask Allah to make us live in a state of Islam, and to make us die in a state of Islam, and to enter Jannah with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I ask Allah on this day to strengthen our hearts, to strengthen our brotherhood and sisterhood, to help us establish a beautiful and model community that will inspire others. I ask Allah, as He gathered us here as brothers and sisters in this shape and form, that He will gather all of us in His Jannah on the Day of Judgment. Allahumma ameen.